The wind spoke low that evening, brushing dust through the tall grass and whistling against the bones of an old wooden house. There wasn't much to it, 3 rooms and a porch that sagged in the middle, like a tired man leaning on a cane. Inside, everything was quiet except the slow ticking of a mantel clock and the sound of boots scuffing against worn pine. Caleb Harper moved through the silence like a shadow that had forgotten how to cast light. The sun had nearly tucked itself beneath the edge of the world, dragging with it the last of the day's warmth. He set his hat down by the door and lit a single lamp, its glow trembling just enough to make the room feel lonelier. The fields outside had turned to gold before dusk, swaying like prayer flags in the wind. He used to watch that from the porch with a cup of chicory coffee and her hand in his. But that was years ago, before the fever took her and the baby in one cruel winter month. Now he didn't sit out there much. Didn't sip anything. Didn't wait for anything. He kept the land, barely. Fed the chickens, mended the fence, checked the water lines, patched the barn roof when the rains cut through. He worked like someone repaying a debt to a ghost. Not because he wanted to live, but because dying felt too dramatic for someone who'd already vanished from the inside out. The sky had turned violet when he heard the first noise, something soft like straw shifting under weight. A mouse, he figured at first. But it came again. A heavier breath, a sound with purpose. Lantern in hand, Caleb stepped into the barn. The door creaked, and dust danced up into the light like ash from a long-dead fire. She was there. A bundle of a figure half buried in hay, knees curled tight to her chest, boots caked in dirt, dress torn at the hem. One hand clutched a small satchel, the other covered her face as if the world had thrown too much at her to look back. For a moment, he thought she might be dead. But then she stirred, slow and small, like someone easing out of a nightmare. He didn't speak, didn't move closer. Just stood by the stall wall, watching her breathe, letting the moment decide itself. Something about the way she slept looked desperate, not careless. She hadn't stumbled in drunk or by mistake. She'd chosen this spot like a dog curling up in the last dry patch of earth it could find. In the halo of the lantern, he saw her face, not old but worn. A woman who'd seen more seasons than she should have had to. Cheekbones too sharp for comfort. Eyes shut tight, like if she opened them, the world might break her one more time. On the ground near her pack, a folded envelope peeked out. He didn't touch it, just knelt, knees cracking, and covered her better with a horse blanket. He should have sent her on her way. Said something firm. Told her to leave first light. But the part of him that remembered his wife's final words, a prayer whispered against the cold, couldn't summon hardness now. Instead, he poured water from the pump into a tin cup, left it near her hand, and went back to the house. That night, sleep came in short breaths and long silences. The fire burned low. He kept the lamp lit longer than usual, watching shadows move on the wall. Something about the girl in the barn turned the air different, heavier but not cruel. Like the first drops before a storm that might finally bring rain. When the rooster called out to morning, Caleb was already dressed. He didn't wake her. Didn't knock or holler. He brewed coffee, strong and bitter, and fried 2 eggs in the iron skillet. The barn door creaked again just after the sky bled into pale blue. She stood at the threshold, wrapped in the blanket like armor. Her eyes, dark as tilled soil, scanned him with a blend of apology and warning. He nodded once. She stepped in slow, like someone unsure if kindness was bait. He placed the coffee near the edge of the table. She didn't sit, just hovered like a ghost unsure of its welcome. "I ain't gonna ask what put you there," he said finally. His voice was rough gravel, not unkind. "But I reckon you're hungry." She nodded once. Still said nothing. Her hands were trembling when she reached for the cup. The silence between them wasn't uncomfortable, it was something else. Like 2 people who'd both forgotten how to talk without hurting. She ate like she hadn't tasted warmth in days. Every movement careful, like someone who expected to be punished for needing too much. When she finally spoke, it was soft. A wind through dry grass. "My name's Etta." He just nodded. That was enough for now. She took a folded slip from her satchel and placed it on the table. The letter was creased a dozen ways, ink faded but legible. Caleb didn't read it, not at first. I came out west to marry, she said, eyes fixed on the steam rising from the mug. He never showed. He looked down at the letter. The name on it wasn't his. It was another man's, some rancher 4 towns over who'd probably changed his mind, or died, or worse. I walked, she added after a moment, till my boots split. Caleb studied her a while. Not her body. Her posture. Her voice. The way she stood like a person bracing for more weather. You can rest here a day, he said finally. Long as you need. She looked up at him. And in her eyes something flickered, not hope, not quite, but the memory of it. I don't want to be a burden. Folks round here don't have time for burdens, he said. Only work. You can help with the hens if you want. Something in her face relaxed. Not a smile. Just less guarded. They spent the morning in silence, mending a broken gate and checking the water trough. Etta didn't complain, didn't flinch from dirt or splinters. She moved like a woman who had no illusions left to lose. But when she touched the hens, her hands were careful. That was something. As the sun climbed, he caught her watching the hills. Not like she wanted to run. Just like she needed to know the world still had edges. They ate again near midday. Bread and beans. Quiet chewing. The wind played with the curtains. Caleb almost asked her where she came from. But then he didn't. Because she was already here. That night she slept in the spare room. A cot, a quilt, and the soft creak of wood adjusting to a new weight. He listened for a while, just to make sure she didn't cry. She didn't. In the barn, the horses were calm. The hens cooed in the coop. Somewhere beyond the trees, a coyote sang to the stars. And inside, 2 people who didn't quite believe in beginnings shared a roof without a name for it yet. Before dawn, he brewed coffee again. It was what he did. Ritual. Habit. Survival. When he stepped onto the porch, he saw her there, barefoot, wrapped in the same blanket, watching the horizon paint itself with fire and gold. She didn't speak, just nodded at the cup he handed her. They sipped in silence, side by side. And for a moment, just a moment, the emptiness inside him felt like it had room for something else. Not hope. Not yet. But maybe, something that came before hope. A seed. And the world was quiet enough to hear it settle into the dust. The days moved like slow clouds over the prairie, soft, wide, and full of unsaid things. Caleb rose early as always, tending the chickens with quiet hands, his boots sinking into the earth like he belonged nowhere else. Etta began to rise with him now, never asking, never needing to be told. She learned the rhythm of the place quickly, like she was stitching herself into its silence one thread at a time. She'd sweep the porch, feed the hens, bring water in from the pump without a word. There was no grand gratitude in her movements, only a sort of resolve, as if working meant she still mattered. Caleb watched her when she wasn't looking. The way her shoulders moved beneath the linen of her dress, tight from years of wear. The way her hair, loose and wind-chased, caught sunlight like bits of gold and ash. She was a beautiful woman, but not in the way folks in towns whispered about. Her beauty was a kind that came from loss, like a statue chipped by time, somehow more precious for every scar. They didn't speak much. A few words here and there. Simple, needful things. The well's low. Storm might be coming. We got coyotes again near the north fence. But their silences were not empty. They were full of presence, like music that said more in its rests than in its note. Sometimes, he'd catch her standing still, hands buried in her apron, looking out toward the dirt path that led away from the house. Not longing. Not quite. More like wondering if it would call her back someday. One evening, after supper, he found her out by the barn, sitting against the post where the old swing used to hang. The swing had rotted down years ago, but the beam still stood tall, reaching into nothing. She had her knees up, arms wrapped around them, chin resting soft. He sat beside her without asking. The sky was turning bruise purple, stars beginning to peek through like shy children. I don't know where to go, she said, just above a whisper. Every road I took turned me into someone I didn't recognize. He looked down at his boot. The dust caked in the seams. The way the leather had split near the toe. I reckon I did the same, he said. Only I stayed put while I did it. Her eyes flicked to him, gentle but full of something sharp. Why didn't you leave this place? He thought about it, took his time. The wind tugged gently at the wheatgrass around them. My wife died here, he said. So did my son. If I left, I don't know if they'd follow. Etta didn't flinch. Just nodded once, like pain recognized itself in his words. That letter I carried, she said, voice shaking only slightly. It wasn't the first. I'd written others. Got nothing back. Except him. She didn't say his name. Didn't need to. He sent money for the train. Promised a cabin and a mule. Said I'd be treated right. But when I got to town, nobody knew his name. Caleb stayed quiet. The kind of quiet that made room. I walked until I ran out of road. Your barn was the last place before I fell down. He looked at her then, really looked. She wasn't fragile. She was frayed. But every thread was still strong. I don't have much, he said. But if you want to stay longer, you can. She turned to him slowly, something unspoken flickering in her eyes. I don't want to be a ghost in someone else's house, she whispered. I want to be real again. The words hit him somewhere deep. He didn't know how to reply. They sat in silence until the stars filled the sky, and the crickets started to sing. The days that followed grew quieter still, but warmer somehow. The way winter shifts toward spring without announcing it. Etta began baking again. First bread, then small pies, then coffee cakes dusted in sugar. She didn't ask to use the stove. Just filled the house with scent, like she was healing it through its own walls. Caleb fixed the swing beam. Hung a new rope, sanded down a plank, tied the knots himself. He never said it was for her. But she found it, one dusk, and sat on it with both hands wrapped around the rope. He watched her from the porch. Didn't speak. Just drank the moment. Then came the letter. It arrived on horseback from a rider headed to the next town over. Folded tight and sealed with wax. Caleb didn't recognize the name. Etta read it once, hands trembling, eyes unmoving. When she finished, she set it gently on the table and stood still for a long while. What is it? He asked, careful. She breathed through her nose, deep and long. My sister. She's dying. The silence between them stretched out like a winter horizon. She's 3 days south, Etta continued. She's asking for me. Caleb nodded slowly. You should go. Etta didn't cry. Not right then. But her throat worked like she was swallowing glass. I'm afraid, she admitted, that if I leave, I won't come back. And I want to. He looked down, hands curling around the rim of his hat. Then come back. Simple as that. She stared at him for a long while. Then turned and walked out into the dusk. That night, she packed a small bag. Nothing much. Just a few clothes, a jar of preserves, a worn book of hymns. Caleb left the wagon hitched and waiting, the horses fed and blanketed. He didn't ask for promises. He just helped her up. They rode in silence until they reached the fork in the road. Beyond it, nothing but open trail and time. She looked at him then, really looked, and for the first time since she'd arrived, she touched his hand. I never believed in places, she said. Only people. He squeezed her fingers gently. Then you got a place here, he said. She smiled, small and sorrowful, but true. And then she was gone down the road, the wagon creaking into the wind. Caleb stood alone at the crossroads long after she'd disappeared from sight. The breeze picked up, rustling the tall grass. A hawk circled overhead. The world kept spinning. He turned back toward the farm, boots heavy but sure. Inside the house, her scent lingered in the kitchen. Flour. Cinnamon. Warmth. He didn't speak her name. Just poured himself a cup of coffee and sat by the window, watching the swing move in the breeze. Not everything had to end to be over. And sometimes, endings were just another way for something else to begin. The days without her stretched wide and still, long shadows on empty fields. Caleb moved through them like a ghost in his own skin. He mended fences, tended crops, fed the hens, but something essential had gone quiet inside the house. He told himself he didn't expect her to return. That people came and went like storms, leaving behind broken things and soft echoes. Still, he left the swing hanging. Still, he brushed off the step every morning. Still, he left the barn door unlatched. Weeks passed. The winds began to change, carrying the scent of rain and distant firewood. Early autumn pressed its breath into the soil, curling the leaves at their edges. And just when the silence began to harden into resignation, Caleb saw her silhouette cresting the hill. She came walking this time. No wagon, no horse, just a worn satchel slung over one shoulder, and the wind in her skirts. Caleb didn't rush out to meet her. He only stood on the porch, one hand braced on the post, watching her move as though through a dream. She reached the bottom step and paused, breath heavy with miles and meaning. He didn't speak. Neither did she. Instead, she climbed the steps and placed her palm flat against his chest. The weight of it, not pressing but anchoring, sent a stillness through him. Her eyes were tired, but they held something new. A steadiness. "She's gone," Etta said, voice ragged. "My sister. Buried beneath an oak tree. I stayed to settle the house. Burned some of her letters. Sewed up the things she left open." Caleb nodded. "And then," she whispered, "I came back. It was enough." That night she unpacked slowly. Every item placed with care. As if she weren't just returning, but choosing the place this time. The hymnal went by the hearth. Her dress hung beside his coat. And her shoes, cracked and dust-worn, rested just beneath the bed. Caleb watched from the kitchen as she lit a candle near the window. The house, which had been no more than beams and dust, seemed to inhale again. They found a new rhythm, quieter than before, but deeper. They didn't fall into love like in those penny novels or town gossip tales. No stolen kisses. No fireworks. What grew between them was slow and rooted. A thing that took shape in the pauses between chores. In the soft brushing of hands over bread dough. In the long, late silences where both chose to stay. Sometimes, Etta hummed while she worked, old, wordless tunes from nowhere in particular. And sometimes, Caleb left wildflowers on her pillow, never saying they were his. They ate by lantern light most nights. Soup, biscuit, whatever could be coaxed from the earth or gathered from the coop. And afterward, they'd sit by the fire, feet brushing, neither reaching too far nor pulling away. Then, one day, she asked to plant something. Not crops, not grain. A garden. For softness, she said. For color. He took her into town to buy seeds. She chose lavender and sweet pea, thyme and poppies. Things that didn't feed a man, but fed a soul. Together, they tilled the earth by the east fence, her in boots 2 sizes too big, him with a smile he didn't realize had returned. They planted with their hands close, the soil getting under their fingernails, cool and rich. She laughed when the wind stole her hat. He didn't tell her that laugh had become his favorite sound. That night, she took his hand in both of hers by the fire. "I never had a place where I could plant something and expect it to stay," she said. "Never trusted anything not to leave." He looked at their hand. Hers callous now, but warm. His rough, but steady. "You can trust this," he said. And she did. Weeks passed, and the garden grew. Not fast. Not all at once. But enough. Caleb added a second chair to the porch, just beside his. Close enough for elbows to touch. And most evenings they sat there, watching the sun fold itself into the earth. Sometimes she would speak. Of childhood memories, sweet and painful. Of men who left bruises instead of blessings. Of dreams long buried under duty. He never pressed her. Only listened. And in return, she learned him too. How he still saw his wife's shadow in the hallway. How he sometimes spoke to his son when no one was around. How he feared that everything good would end too soon. "You love with your silence," she once said. "That's why it's so loud in here." He looked at her then, not as a stranger, not as a guest, but as the woman who had rethreaded the soul of this house. They didn't speak of marriage, not yet. But the way they moved around each other said more than vows ever could. She laid her head on his shoulder without asking. He kissed the top of her hair when passing by. They shared blankets and burdens alike. And then the storm came. Late one evening, the wind began to howl, sharp and angry. The sky cracked open with lightning, and rain beat the roof like fists. Etta rushed to close the shutters. Caleb tied the barn doors tight. But it wasn't enough. A great roar split the night, wood breaking, earth tearing. The old elm by the shed had fallen, right onto the chicken coop. When the rain passed and the sun returned, they found the damage. The coop was shattered. The hens scattered. Caleb dropped to his knees in the mud, heart heavy. That coop had taken him weeks to build. Had been his son's last project before the fever came. He stared at the broken boards like staring into a grave. Etta knelt beside him. No words. Just her hand on his back, gentle and sure. "We'll rebuild it," she said softly. He didn't answer. But that night she took his face in her hands by firelight. Not with urgency, but with truth. "You don't have to let go of what you had to make room for me," she said. "Grief and love, they don't cancel each other. They stack." He closed his eyes. Let the words sink in like rain into thirsty soil. And in the days that followed, they rebuilt the coop together. New wood. Stronger frame. A fresh beginning made by both their hands. And when it was done, Etta painted a small symbol on the door, a sun rising over a river. She didn't explain it. He didn't ask. But it looked like hope. That evening, as they watched the hens explore their new home, Caleb reached for her hand and didn't let go. The garden near the east fence was starting to bloom. Lavender first, then the sweet peas. The thyme crept low and stubborn across the soil. Their home, this quiet place of old wounds and soft things, was becoming whole again. And though no vows had been spoken, the air was heavy with a kind of promise. One they both felt in their bones. And it was only just beginning. The frost came early that year, whispering across the prairie like a ghost with secret. It bit at the garden's edges, curling leaves into quiet husks and turning the earth brittle underfoot. Even the air felt thinner, as though the sky were drawing its breath before something holy or harrowing. Caleb felt it in his bones before the first snowfall. A stillness too deep for weather alone. Something was coming. He didn't name it, didn't try to. But he caught himself watching the horizon more than usual, as if waiting for something to appear, or disappear. Inside the house, Etta moved quieter than usual. She carried herself like a woman who had folded herself into a place and now feared being unfolded again. Her steps were careful, measured. Her hands lingered longer on Caleb's shoulders. Her eyes, those pale, thoughtful eyes, searched his face in the dim mornings like she was memorizing it for a time when he wouldn't be there. They hadn't spoken of marriage. Not yet. But the truth of it was everywhere, in the way her dresses now hung on the same hook as his coat, in the way he repaired the lace on her apron as if it were scripture. Then, just as the frost settled into the fields for good, word came from town. The circuit preacher was coming through. Only one night. Heading west by morning. He'd be resting his mule and breaking bread before sunrise. Caleb returned from town with that knowledge burning in his chest like coal. He found Etta in the kitchen, elbows deep in flour, her hair in wild wisps from kneading dough. He said nothing at first, only watched her. Watched the way her body had made space in this home, filled it not with noise but with meaning. She was no longer the woman in his barn, half-starved and shivering. She was part of the soil now. Part of him. He cleared his throat. She looked up. "There's a preacher in town," he said softly. "He's staying tonight." She dusted flour from her fingers. "So So if a man were of a mind to ask a woman something, he paused. Might be a good night for it. Her hands stilled. She didn't smile, not right away. But her eyes turned wet, and she stepped close, placing her palms flat against his chest. I never thought I'd be anyone's something, she whispered. You're not, he said. You're everything. The wedding happened just before dawn. No lace. No candles. Just two people and the preacher standing beneath the east fence where the last of the lavender clung to life. The preacher read his verses while the cold bit through their clothes. Etta's hands trembled as she slid a simple silver ring onto Caleb's finger, an heirloom from her mother, polished bright. He gave her one made from bent copper wire, warmed by months in his pocket. The words were spoken. The covenant sealed. The morning had not yet broken. And when they walked back to the house, hand in hand, the sky turned gold behind them, as though the sun had waited for their yes. They didn't speak much that day. There was no need. The silence was full, the kind of full that hummed like a cello string held taut. Later, with the preacher gone and the dishes cleaned, they sat on the porch, watching a pale wind ripple through the dry grass. Etta leaned her head on his shoulder. I used to dream about mornings like this, she said. But I never thought I'd earn one. Caleb kissed her forehead, his hand warm over hers. You didn't earn it, he murmured. You endured to it. That night the house felt different, like it had grown root. The floorboards no longer creaked with grief but with memory. The walls didn't echo. They breathed. But the peace didn't last. Just before midnight, a noise came from the barn. Not a coyote. Not a storm. Something heavier. Caleb was already reaching for the rifle before he realized his hands were shaking. Etta stood at the window, lips parted, eyes narrowed into the dark. They heard it again, wood shifting. A boot dragging. Stay inside, Caleb said gently. Etta nodded, but she didn't move. He stepped out into the cold. The moon hung low and pale, casting long silver shadows. The barn door stood ajar, creaking softly in the breeze. He raised the rifle, heart pounding like hoofbeats in his chest. Who's there? He called, voice low but firm. No answer. He stepped inside, boots crunching hay and frost. In the far corner, a man rose slowly from the shadows. Tall. Thin. With a familiar hat pulled low over his brow. Caleb stiffened. The man smiled, sharp and wrong. I'm lookin' for a woman, he drawled. One that ran off with my money and a ring she never earned. Caleb didn't lower the rifle. You're not welcome here. The man chuckled. She told you she was a widow, didn't she? That she was free? Lies. All of it. She's mine. Was mine. And I've come to collect. Caleb's finger twitched over the trigger. Leave. You shoot me, the man said, stepping forward, and folks'll wonder what kind of man buries another without a name. Caleb didn't blink. I won't bury you. I'll leave you for the crows. Behind him, he heard soft footsteps in the snow. Etta stood just inside the door, her eyes locked on the stranger. You don't scare me any more, she said. The man's sneer faltered. You don't own me. You never did. I fed you, he snapped. Put shoes on your feet. You broke me, she said. And I'm not yours to break again. He took another step toward her, and Caleb raised the rifle higher. One more inch, Caleb said coldly, and I'll make good on every promise I've never said aloud. The man hesitated. Then something in him shifted. He raised his hands, mock innocent. No need for blood, he muttered. I see how it is. He turned slowly, spat into the hay, and walked out. Caleb waited until the footsteps faded into nothing, then lowered the gun. He looked at Etta, his face pale, his chest heaving. You all right? She nodded slowly, then moved to him, wrapping her arms around his waist. I didn't want you to know about him, she said. I was afraid. He held her tightly. You never have to fear me. Outside, the wind had stilled. The stars blinked softly, like lanterns from some faraway land. They stood in the barn, wrapped around each other like roots and earth, like fire and the hand that warms itself by it. and when morning came, it found them still standing together, whole, unshaken, and more real than anything the world could take. In the days that followed, the frost retreated. The chickens returned to laying. The garden, though wilted by cold, held a few stubborn blooms. And in the quiet of that home, two people who had been hollowed by loss grew full again, not with noise or pride, but with quiet things. Trust, safety, love. Things that didn't come fast but stayed when they finally arrived. And if you ever passed by that homestead in the pale light of dawn, you'd see a swing still swaying by the barn. A garden that bloomed out of season. And a porch where two chairs sat side by side, waiting for the morning to know what they already did. That love, real love, doesn't come with thunder. It comes with the kind of silence that hums like music and stays long after the last word is spoken.